Buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hola, buenas tardes a todas las
Hello,
personas que están
everybody.
esta tarde compartiendo
Hello to
con
all of
nosotras
you
aquí, con
who are
nosotras
sharing with
este
you
webinar.
this webinar.
Quiero agradecer a todas
I'd
las
like to thank
organizaciones
all of the
que han apoyado en la
organizations
participación
that
de
have
este
given us
segundo
her
ciclo.
support in
Este
the
webinar
organization of
se
this
enmarca en un ciclo de
cycle.
webinars que estamos
This webinar is part of a
organizando en
cycle
marzo de los 20 años
that
de la
is being
resolución
held
1325.
within the framework
Estamos organizando
of
varias organizaciones
1325.
de manera coordinada.
We
Quiero
are
agradecer a
organizing all of
Gobierno de
it in a
España,
well-coordinated way. I'd
a
like to
ICI,
thank, well, Spain,
a la Embajada por la
ICIP,
Solidaridad, a CEIPAD, a la Escuela
FEPAT,
de Cultura de
the
Paz,
School
a la
for a
Universidad
Culture
de
of
Málaga
Peace, the University of Malaga,
y a el
SIP,
Centro
and
de la
the
Paz.
Center for
Todas estas
Peace.
organizaciones
All of these
nos
organizations
hemos coordinado para organizar estos
have
espacios de
coordinated
discusión
to organize
interés para
this
las personas
space
que siguen la agenda de paz
for all of
y
the
la
people
resolución
interested in following up the
1325.
Agenda for
Este ciclo
Peace
de webinars se llama 20 años de agenda de
1325.
mujeres, paz y seguridad, avances y
This
propuestas para el
conference
futuro.
cycle is entitled 20 years of
Es un ciclo de
the
webinars de 3 viernes.
Women, Peace and
Empezó
Security
el año
Agenda.
pasado, que fue una sesión
We
muy
started last
interesante.
Friday with a
Estamos
very
hoy
interesting
con las
session,
compañeras
and
de
today
Colombia,
we
de
have colleagues
Palestina y vamos a
from
tener con las
Colombia
realidades de Yemen y Siria.
and
Y el próximo viernes,
Syria
recordaros
and
que también
Yemen.
va a
And
haber otra sesión muy
there will be another
interesante
session,
sobre
a very interesting one,
seguridad, ¿no? Sobre una
about
nueva visión de seguridad
security
en esta agenda.
or a new vision of
Sí que es
security in this
importante, ¿no? Y
agenda.
os invitamos a
It is
participar en estos
important
espacios
that you
y a
participate
compartir con
in these
nosotras
spaces and that you share with us
y a dialogar con nosotras esta agenda.
this
Antes de
agenda.
empezar, sí
Before we
que
start,
recordaros
let me
que
remind you
esta sesión va a ser
that
grabada
this session will be recorded,
y bueno, para que todas las personas lo tengáis en cuenta y
just in
vamos a hacer
case
después
you want to
compartirla
take that into account.
en,
And it's
en las
going to
páginas
be
web de las organizaciones
shared
que
in the
que lo
different
estamos
web
organizando.
pages of the different
Vamos a
organizations.
tener, bueno, hay una interpretación simultánea
There
de
is
español y
simultaneous
español a inglés,
interpretation
porque, bueno,
from
sabéis que
Spanish into
estamos
English
teniendo
and from
problemas
English into
de
Spanish
Palestina, ¿no? Y
because we have a
nos
Palestinian
parecía
speaker.
importante
But
que
it was
personas que nos
very
pueden estar
important
escuchando
that
desde distintos
anybody who may
lugares
be listening from
que
different
vengan aquí
places
no hablen español,
in
pero
the world
puedan
so that they can
escucharnos.
actually follow the
Si veis ahí en
Spanish
la pantalla vuestra
being
derecha, en la parte de
translated
abajo,
into
hay
English.
un simbolito que es una bola del
In
mundo, eso
order
es
to
el
listen
español.
to the different
Si
languages,
queréis
there is
escuchar
a world icon at the bottom of the screen. If you want to
en
listen
inglés,
to
si le
Spanish,
dais ahí tenéis que
you
poner
just
inglés,
have to
porque
click
para eso
Spanish. And if you want to
vamos
listen to
a
English, you
compartir.
just need to click
Al final
English.
de
At the
este
end
espacio vamos a tener un
of
tiempo para
this
preguntas, que sí que
space,
lo sentimos mucho no
there
poder
will
hacerlo
be
del
time
directo,
for
pero lo haremos a
Q&A.
través del chat.
So through the
Y os
chat, you
invitamos
can
también a
actually send your
poder
questions.
compartir pues, algunos
And
mensajes,
if you
reflexiones a
want
través
to share
de Twitter,
messages,
¿no? Y ahí abajo también os ponemos algunos hashtags, ¿no? Que vamos
and there are
utilizando
also some
debajo de
hashtags
estos webinars.
for you to
Pues muchas
actually
gracias a
share
todos también
messages.
para todo el mundo que estáis
Thank you
conectados
all
hasta ahora,
for
esta
being here with
tarde
us
y esperamos
on a Friday
que esta
afternoon.
sesión
And we hope that this
sea muy
session will be
enriquecedora.
a full one and a
Y
very
ya
interesting one indeed.
enmarcando esto,
So let me frame the
sí
context.
que bueno, la sesión de hoy va muy
Today's
enfocada
session
sobre todo a hablar de la participación de
will
las
talk
mujeres
about the
en la
participation of
agenda
women,
y lo que
the
queremos destacar
effect
es
of
que
the agenda.
las mujeres
And
que
what we would
como
like to
víctimas y
highlight
las
is
mujeres
that
como
women
agentes de cambio en la paz.
now are going from being
En
victims
la
to
sesión pasada
agents
tuvimos
for
la
change.
oportunidad de escuchar
Last Friday,
todo el marco de la resolución
we could actually
1325 y hoy
listen
también nos
to, within the
toca
framework
escuchar
of
las
Resolution
dificultades,
1325,
también los retos, ¿no? A nivel internacional,
what the different challenges
la
are
participación
internationally,
de los debates, ¿no?
and the participation in the
En el
different
Consejo de Seguridad
discussions
de Naciones Unidas.
within the
Y
context
hoy
of
queríamos enfocarnos en
security
dos
of the United
realidades
Nations.
locales,
And
muy
today we want
puntuales
to
de países
actually concentrate on the local
donde venimos
realities
articulando
of,
trabajo,
of different countries where we have
países
been
en los que
articulating work,
están en diferentes momentos,
countries
¿no?
that are going through
de
different
paz, en diferentes
stages
momentos de ese proceso, ¿no? Que la paz
within
no
that
es un
process.
proceso continuo.
It is a
Y
continuous
que nos
process.
interesaba
We
también
have
hacer
to
esto,
remember that.
visibilizar
And we
diferentes
want to make
realidades,
visible
contextos,
the different
experiencias y
realities,
también pues
contexts, and
que vendrán
experiences.
con nosotras hoy
And also, well, today we will be listening to women who are on the field and working hard in their own country realities. I'm going to introduce you three women who are here with us. It's such an honor and such a pleasure for me to share this space with such excellent panel members. And they will talk to us about three different realities, three different meeting points, and three different realities. Let me introduce to start Clemencia Carabali. She is an African Colombian leader. She has been fighting for more than 30 years for the defense of women's rights and the defense of the Black Colombian population rights. And she works for an association of women called AZOM, the women of African descent from the Cauca region, which is probably one of the regions that have been most affected by the Colombian internal war. And during the last 20 years, she has been leading different processes for the advocacy of the rights of Black Colombian women. And it's such a pleasure to have her with us. She will start, and then we will start a dialogue. This afternoon, we also have Pamela Urrutia. She's a researcher from the School Culture of Peace in Barcelona. She specializes in the analysis of conflict and peace in Northern Africa and the Middle East. She's a journalist and a researcher. She'll talk to us about the participation of women in Yemen and Syria. And finally, let me introduce you Zoraida Hussein. She is responsible for the political incidents of Alliance for Solidarity in Palestine, women's political representation in Palestine. And she founded WATAC in 1992. And since then, she has always been linked to the awareness raising regarding the presence of women in political contexts and cultural and economical contexts. And she has been promoting the increasing participation of women, working for the rights of women in a context as difficult as the Palestinian context. Currently, we are very fortunate because she's working, as I've said, for the Alliance for Solidarity in Palestine. So, having made the presentations, without any further ado, let's start with Clemencia. Well, the way we want to actually orient this space. Colombia is a country that 4 years ago a peace agreement was signed. And internationally, that got a lot of attention because of all of the civil society organizations and the women's organizations that participate in that peace treaty signature. The Colombian case is a remarkable case in terms of how it was guaranteed, how the participation of different groups from different contexts was guaranteed, especially the participation of women and different ethnic groups. In this case, at an international level, Colombia is a significant case. How did Colombia go about it? How did they achieve it? So, based on the agreement, what the agreement, I mean, what has the agreement actually meant for your reality? And you will be able to share that with us, given that you live there. Are they complying with the clauses of the agreement in terms of the participation that had been promised to these women groups during these 4 years of implementation of the peace
si no
treaty.
se está cumpliendo, pues cuáles son los principales obstáculos
And
que
if they are
se
not being complied with,
encontrado.
what are the main hurdles you're facing?
Bueno, muy buenos días
Well, good
para
morning
todos y todas,
to
para
everybody,
quienes han sacado su tiempo
all
para
those who
compartir
have
con nosotras
actually got the
este
time to
espacio,
share with
que es
us
muy
this space,
importante porque
which
nos
is a
permite
very
seguir
important space because it allows us
visibilizando
to keep on
a
using
nuestras voces, porque
to
permite
make
seguir
our voices to be heard.
compartiendo las
And it allows us
experiencias,
to
los
share
símbolos y
the
las
experience
defensoras de derechos humanos en
that
Colombia y
we that
especialmente
that
las mujeres
that freedom defenders
colombianas
in
que
Colombia have,
luchan
especially
por la
Colombian women
defensa de la paz.
who
La paz
defend
para
peace.
nosotros en
Peace
Colombia
to
ha
us in Colombia
significado la firma del acuerdo de paz entre el
has
gobierno y las FARC.
involved the
Para
signature of the
nosotros en
peace
Colombia
treaty. To us in
ha
Colombia,
significado
that
una
has
gran
meant
oportunidad
a
para que
great
como país
opportunity
podamos
as a
parar los años
country.
de
We can
violencia
turn
que han
page, we can
azotado
start
durante
a
50
fresh
años.
new chapter in our
Significaba que en
country's
ese
history.
momento de la
It
firma del
also
mismo
implied
una luz de esperanza para
a
nosotras las
light
mujeres
of hope
colombianas que
for
vivimos en
Black
territorios,
Colombian men and
la
women,
mayoría de estos fuertemente afectados por todas las
most of
acciones
whom had been very much affected by
generadas
all of
de
the
procesos de confrontaciones y por todos los
actions
actos de
generated
violencia que se
by
dan en un contexto de
the
guerra.
different parties involved in the
Pero
war and
también
the
ha significado
violence.
muchísimos retos. El
And it has
reto
also
de
implied many, many
poder,
different challenges,
justamente en el marco de las
especially within
herramientas,
the
entre
framework
otras,
of the
como es
tools, amongst
la
others,
resolución
like
1325 del Consejo de
Resolution
Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas,
1325,
poder utilizarlas como
to
mecanismo
be able to
para garantizar
use
nuestra
that resolution
participación,
to
como un
guarantee
mecanismo que
our
contribuye
claims
a que las mujeres
as
podamos
a
desde
mechanism
nuestra
for
experiencia
women based
como
on their
víctimas,
experience
como
as
mujeres, como
victims,
constructoras
as
de paz,
women, as peace builders,
aportar
to
con
be able to
ideas y
bring
esfuerzos
forth the
para una
ideas and
paz estable
actions
y
for a
sostenible
stable
en
and
nuestros
sustainable
territorios, en
peace
nuestra región
in
y en
our
nuestro país.
territory and in our
A la
regions.
firma del acuerdo de paz
Now, the
también ha
signature
significado
of the
retos
peace treatment
importantes,
has
como
also
es
involved significant
fortalecer la
challenges,
articulación
like
entre los
strengthening
procesos
the
organizativos que
articulation of
trabajamos por la
organizational
defensa
processes in
y
which
por
we
la
work for the
reivindicación de
defense
nuestros derechos
and the
territoriales
claim
y de
for
nuestros derechos
our
humanos.
rights and our
Dentro de
human
estas
rights,
claves,
our territorial
la
rights and human
articulación de
rights. The
movimientos
articulation
nacionales de
with
mujeres con
national
movimientos
women
regionales,
movements, with
como
regional
son los consejos
women
comunitarios,
movements,
que son las autoridades
and
étnico-territoriales
with the
en el marco
ethnic
de la ley 70,
territorial
que es
authorities within the framework
una
of Law
reivindicación
60,
que hemos
which is
conquistado y
one of the pieces of
negociado en
legislation
Colombia,
that we have
pero
conquered,
también la articulación que
but
hemos tenido
also
con
the
el Proceso
articulation
Nacional de
with
Comunidades
movements
Negras,
like the
que nuestro
Vegas movement
énfasis
and the
de trabajo
progressive movement,
siempre ha sido
whose work
incidir
has
en las
always
políticas
been to
públicas
advocate in
a través de promover
public realm
reformas,
through the
leyes que
promotion of
permitan el goce
reforms,
efectivo
laws,
de los derechos de la gente,
and
pero
the
también
rights of people.
produce la posibilidad de
And
defender
also,
la
it has
vida,
given us
de
the
proteger y
possibility
defender la vida.
to protect and defend life.
Sin duda alguna, y
Doubtlessly,
es muy desafortunado
and
que
this is rather
este gobierno de
unfortunate,
Colombia, el
the
gobierno actual
current
en este periodo,
government of
pues no
Colombia
tenga como prioridad
does not
seguir
have
con la implementación del
as an
acuerdo de
agenda
paz.
priority
Y
the
decimos que
implementation
no
of the
pone
peace
prioridad este
agreement.
gobierno la
And when I
implementación del
say
acuerdo
that
de
this
paz por
government
dos
does not
hechos.
have that as a
Una cosa es
priority
lo que
is for
lo
different
que se
reasons.
dice y los
One thing is
informes
what
que se
people
hacen desde
say
el gobierno, desde las instituciones
and what the
hacia
institution and the
afuera
government
y otra cosa muy
says
distinta
to the
es lo que
outside world.
lamentablemente se
And
encuentra
something
desde
totally
dentro
different is
las
what
comunidades, las
they
organizaciones
do
y las
with
mujeres y
the
las
communities,
niñas
the
en el
organizations, the
territorio.
women, and the girls
El
on the
incumplimiento es
territory.
evidente.
The lack of
Hay muchos
compliance
temas
is
en que el avance
clear.
es un
There are
poco, es
many
importante, pero
relevant issues.
debería
It is
ser
important,
mucho mayor, tendría
although
que
it
ser más
should be
importante,
larger.
que es
It would be
las comunidades
very
mujeres
important
damnificadas.
that
Sin
communities
embargo, hay otros
participate.
puntos donde
And
el
yet,
avance es
there are
absolutamente
other
nulo, como
points
es el tema
in which
de
this is not
tierras.
done.
Hay muy pocos
Like, for
avances
example, the
en
land
el tema de
issue. There has been
sustitución de
very
cultivos.
little progress in the
Prácticamente esa
system to
política
assign
se ha
land.
puesto a un lado.
The
Los
policy
mayores
has been
avances
left
que hay
aside.
en
The main
términos
guarantees we
del
have
cumplimiento del acuerdo de paz
for the
básicamente tienen
compliance
que
of
ver con el
the
sistema
peace
integral
agreement
de verdad, justicia, reparación y
is based
reconciliación, no
on justice,
represión.
repair,
Y es todo el trabajo que está haciendo la
and
Jurisdicción
all of the
Especial
work
para la Paz,
carried
la
out by the
JEP,
Special
la
Commission for
Comisión de
Peace,
Esclarecimiento de la Verdad
Commission
y la
to
Unidad de
clear the
Búsqueda de
truth
Personas
and the search for people missing.
algunos avances
Thus,
significativos,
here we
pero
find
en
some
general la
significant
presencia y
progress. But
liderazgo
in
que
general,
establece
with
el
regards
Estado
to the in
colombiano
full
en los
presence of the
territorios, la
Colombian state
presencia es muy
in
baja.
the territories is very
Nosotros
low
seguimos
indeed.
reclamando
We
esta
keep on
acción
claiming
excepcional del Estado
that action
seguimos
from
seguimos
the state,
reclamando que los
and we
diferentes
keep
actores
on
armados,
claiming
justamente a
to the
causa
different
de la
armed
no implementación
forces
efectiva y eficaz del acuerdo
the
de
fact that
paz,
they are not
se han
implementing
reorganizado, algunos
effectively
han retomado
the peace
armas
agreements.
y
They have
cierta
been
manera
rearmed. Some of
reciben
them are taking
legitimidad
up
por
their
presuntas
weapons
acciones de
again,
violación a los derechos
and
humanos.
that is
Seguimos
having a
haciendo un
significant
llamado a
effect.
que la paz,
We
la
are
construcción de la
calling
paz
for
juntos y
peace.
juntas es la única
The
alternativa
peace
que
building
tenemos
actions
en estos
altogether
momentos
is
para
the
salvar
only choice we
vidas,
have nowadays
para
in order
garantizar
to face the
que la
future and in
gente en
order to
nuestros territorios
guarantee
podamos ser,
that people
hacer
in
y
the different
estar.
territories
Entonces,
can actually
insistimos pues en
get
que
ahead.
resolvamos los diferentes intereses que se
So we
tienen,
should leave
no solo
aside the
sobre la
different
riqueza y
vested
la
interests,
biodiversidad que hay en los
not only
territorios,
about the
sobre la ubicación
biodiversity that exists in the
estratégica para
territories
desarrollar
and the
muchísimas acciones,
geostrategic
sino
locations
también que se
and
depongan
issues to develop
esos
different actions,
intereses
but also
de
we
que se
say that
pretende usar
these
la excusa de
interests
la guerra
should be
para
placed
materializar.
where war is used as an
Porque estamos
excuse.
llevando al país
Because
hacia un
we
abismo.
keep
Y
on
creo que,
bringing
como
our
dije
country
antes,
towards
esta es
the
una
abyss.
oportunidad histórica
We're doomed
en que
for
como
disaster.
colombianos y colombianas
And we Colombian
podemos hacer
men
todo
and
lo que sea
women should
necesario
make
para pasar la
everything
página
at
de
hand in
violencia y
order
que
to
este país
turn
siga
page
creciendo
definitely so that our
como
country
efectivamente lo
keeps
puede
on
ser, porque somos
growing.
un país rico
And
con muchas
that's what it should
posibilidades
do
de
because we're a
prosperidad,
wealthy
pero
country, we're a rich
requerimos que haya
country.
mayor inclusión
But we
y
need
que cese la
greater inclusion,
discriminación, que también es un flagelo muy
and
fuerte que se vive en
discrimination
Colombia
should
y que
be
limita el
left
desarrollo
out.
y las
Because
garantías
discrimination, which is a
de derechos
terrible evil
que
that
las
we have in our
mujeres seres
country,
humanas y más
limits
especialmente para el
actually our
caso de
development,
las comunidades étnicas,
especially
podamos
in
ejercer
ethnic
nuestros derechos
communities,
como pueblos
so that
étnicos.
we can actually claim our
Es
rights as
necesario
people
deponer
of the world.
muchos de estos intereses
A lot of these
quedan
interests
precisamente en
bring
la
us
profundización
to the
de
in
estas
depth
violaciones
analysis
y
of
en
it, which
repetir un
is the
ciclo de
violation, and to
violencia
repeat the
que
cycle of
generan
violence
frustración y que terminan
that
socavando
ends up
la democracia en este
weakening
país.
the democracy in our country.
Muchas gracias,
Well,
Clemencia.
thank you so
Sí que
much,
creo que esta
Clemencia.
pregunta
I
que
have a
es muy
question
importante
for
en
you
base a lo
because
que
I
has
think it is
comentado.
important based on what you have said.
O sea, en este contexto, ¿no?, de
In
violencia
this
que comentas,
context
¿no?, que
of
a veces todavía
violence
en el
you
Estado no
mentioned,
está
and the fact that you say
realmente
that
esta presencia
the
pues
state is not
fuerza
present
que
in
se está
the
materializando, ¿no?, a nivel
territories.
territorial. Y sí que también estamos viendo
And
que el liderazgo, ¿no?,
we
el
have seen
liderazgo
that the
de
leadership
mujeres, como puede ser tu caso, también está
brought by,
generando
by
respuestas
women,
violentas, ¿no?,
as is
en
your
este
case,
lugar.
as
O
also
sea, ¿crees que
is also
estas
facing
respuestas violentas que están
violent
teniendo también desde
reactions.
diferentes entidades, ¿no?, tanto a nivel estatal
And
como estas
what different
estas
institutions have done
organizaciones,
at a state level,
esta es
etc.
una, ¿cómo la interpretáis como
How do you
representantes
interpret
de
it?
mujer líder que estés en el
I
territorio?
mean, you as a
Realmente
leading woman,
ahí crees que las mujeres están teniendo esos espacios de participación
I
más
mean,
allá
do you
de
believe
los
that women are having
varones,
their
se está convirtiendo,
participation
¿no?, y están
space,
accediendo a otros espacios que
what
podemos
is due to
llamar
them?
de más
Are they having any
participación?
access to participation
Bueno,
spaces? Well,
estamos precisamente en una situación
we
bien
are
compleja. Como
precisely
ustedes
in a
saben,
very
cada
complex
día
situation, as
se
you know.
registra la desafortunadas
Every
lista
day,
de líderes y lideresas
we have
amenazadas,
an unfortunate
despreciadas,
growing list of
que hemos sentido
threatened
atentados,
leaders,
pero
both men and
también
women.
incluso que desafortunadamente le quitan
And
la vida.
unfortunately,
Muchas
some of them
lideresas
lose
amenazadas
their
por
life because of
asesinato.
their leadership.
Eso se debe precisamente
And this is
en
due
parte a la falta de
to
implementación del acuerdo de paz,
the lack of
que es
implementation of the
liderazgo
peace
del
agreement
Estado en los territorios
and
y que
the lack of
también se
presence of the
manifiesta en
state
la
in
fuerza
the
pública.
territories.
Y coincide con que la
And
fuerza
this
pública no es
coincides with the
garantía
fact that
realmente en
the public
Colombia, no es
forces are
garantía
not a
para
guarantee in
salvaguardar
Colombia
la vida y
to
menos
safeguard
para salvaguardar la labor
life
de los defensores y
and to
defensoras de derechos
safeguard the
humanos
work
que
of human
hasta mucho
rights defenders.
responden a intereses,
And it also responds to
desafortunadamente.
some vested interests,
Frente al tema de la
unfortunately.
participación,
With regards to the
es
participation of
importante
women,
también que tenemos las mujeres de
I have
seguir
to say
siendo
that we women We
ocupar
need to
esos
keep on
espacios
trying to participate in the
que
spaces
permitan
that will allow us
allanar el camino para
to
la construcción de una paz
open
estable y
the road
duradera.
for the
En esta
construction, for the
situación,
building of a
siendo compleja, las
long-lasting
mujeres nos toca
peace.
ganarnos esos espacios
And women
casi que eh, peleándolos, ¿sí?
have to
¿Verdad?
struggle
Porque
for
no nos
that
ven, no nos oyen,
because
hay
we're
muchas
not listened to, we're
circunstancias
not
que no nos
seen,
escuchan, pero
we're not
tenemos que
listened to.
insistir. Prueba
But
de ello
we
es que
have
la
to
mayoría de las
insist.
instituciones, por ejemplo,
Most
aún
institutions, for
el nivel de
example,
participación de las mujeres es
in
muy
most
bajo,
institutions, the level
incluso
of
más que el
women's
nivel de
participation is
participación de
very
las
low.
mujeres negras.
And
Solo para
even
colocar
lower
ejemplos,
is the participation of Black
en las
women.
administraciones municipales en
In
Colombia
municipal administrations in
tenemos
Colombia,
entendido que solo
there are
hay un
only
3% de mujeres
there is only
en cargos
3%
de
of
toma de
women
decisión
with a decision-making
por ejemplo, en el
post.
sistema integral de verdad,
And
justicia y reparación para
in
personas
the
con base
integral
étnica y
system of
ambiente laboral
justice and
no hay
repair,
una mujer negra,
there
¿sí?
isn't a
Igual
single Black
tampoco
woman.
encontramos en la unidad de
And
búsqueda para
in
personas
the
desaparecidas
search unit for missing people,
dos mujeres en la Jurisdicción Especial para la
there,
Paz
there are no
y para
women in the
nosotros
special
eso no es
jurisdiction, Women
significativo
for
teniendo en
Peace.
cuenta que
And to
somos
us,
alrededor del 10% de
this
la
is not
población en
significant
Colombia.
considering that 10% of
Entonces,
the population
sí hay mucho por
are
hacer
women
para
in this
garantizar
case. So
estar en
there's
esos
a lot to
espacios
be
de
done in
decisión.
order to be
Tenemos que seguir
present in those
haciendo
decision-making
ejercicios de
posts.
empoderamiento,
We need for
haciendo
some
ejercicios de
empowering action.
influencia que no solo ha venido haciendo ASON, en
And
este caso, por ejemplo, con apoyo de Alianza por la
in this case,
Solidaridad
we have the
y
support of the
la
Alliance
cooperación española,
for
en el caso de la Agencia de Cooperación
Solidarity
de la
and
ECO
also
y de la Junta de
the
Andalucía.
cooperation with the
Tenemos
Spanish
también otros procesos
Foreign Aid
organizativos de mujeres
Agency,
que nos ayudan
ISC,
a generar
and
condiciones de
other
empoderamiento para
organizations
que podamos
that allow us to
participar de
generate
manera más efectiva en estos
solidarity
escenarios.
so that we can have a more
Nosotras
effective
venimos
type of
de la
action.
Escuela de Mujeres Constructoras de
We
Paz,
have
que es un escenario
developed
de
the
formación para
School of
mujeres,
Women for the construction, for the
cuyo
building of peace.
propósito precisamente es ese,
And
que estemos mejor
the
cualificadas
idea is that
para participar de
the goal
mejor
is to
manera
qualify us
y
better
seguir
in order to
reclamando
participate better, to keep on
de manera
claiming
pacífica
in a fully peaceful way
nuestra participación en estos espacios
our
que permita
participation
tener esta visión,
in
¿no?
this
No solo de
space
las
that
víctimas,
allows us
sino
to have
también de las mujeres
this
negras,
vision,
que
not
tenemos
only of the victims, but also of
particularidades
the
por
Black
nuestra
Colombian women
cultura,
with
por
our
nuestra
own culture
ancestralidad, pero también
and
particularidades
also
heredadas
because of
del
our
proceso de
specificities
la alianza
inherited
transatlántica
from the
feminista.
process
Y
of
allí hay unas situaciones
transatlantic
particulares que por supuesto
slave trade.
requieren
There
también
are some peculiarities
acciones
here that
particulares.
require
A eso
specific
nosotros le
actions,
llamamos enfoque étnico.
and that's why we call it
Entonces,
an ethnic
la participación con
approach.
enfoque étnico en
So,
estos espacios
participation
para
with an ethnic
nosotros como
approach in
grupos
these
étnicos, como
spaces,
mujeres
we
afrocolombianas,
as
es
Black Colombian women,
importante, pero
is
también para
very
el
important,
conjunto de la
but also
sociedad,
for the whole of
porque es un aporte
society,
más que
because
hacemos
it's
a la
yet
construcción
another
de país,
contribution
a
we
la
make to
construcción
the
de nación
building up
y
of the
sobre
country, to the
todo a
building
la
up of our
construcción de
nation,
democracia
and above
y a
all, to
garantizar
the
condiciones
development
de
and
inclusión
consolidation of our
y
democracy.
a disminuir
And
las
we
brechas que
also
genera
contribute to
la
reducing
discriminación.
the horrible weight of discrimination.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you
Clemencia.
very
Es
much, Clemencia.
importante, ¿no? Lo
I
que
think it's
comentas
so
también,
important what you
todo
mentioned
este enfoque, el cruzar enfoques, que también el otro
to
día en nuestro
cross
webinar lo comentaron las
different approaches
compañeras
and
María
that
Cubillas,
during the
Vanessa, ¿no?
past
El trabajar también
webinar,
esta agenda desde un
our
enfoque
colleagues mentioned
integral,
as well.
es decir, que hay diferentes
I mean,
vínculos, ¿no? Entre
there
los
are
diferentes
different
espacios
links
y grupos, ¿no?
between the
Por
different
ser
groups
mujeres, por ser
of
mujeres
women,
afro, por ser mujeres indígenas, ¿no? Hay
indigenous
diferentes
women, native
situaciones
women.
de desigualdad, ¿no? Que se cruzan y
There
que
are
tenemos que tener en cuenta, ¿no? A la
inequalities
hora de abordar
that are very
las
much present
contribuciones y a la
and
hora
that should be
de
taken into
defender
account when it
el
comes to
garantizar
approaching the
espacios,
policies
espacios de
that guarantee
participación.
participation
Quiero pasar también
spaces.
ahora que, bueno, que a otro
Well,
contexto totalmente diferente,
now we
aunque
have a,
seguro que luego vamos a
let's
ir
go to a
hilando, ¿no?
totally different
Hilando
context.
con un hilo así un poco invisible,
Let's
¿no? Entre
try
esos
and
procesos
knit all
potentes.
of this with a common
Quiero
thread.
pasar con
So now
Pamela
I'm
y
going to give the floor to Pamela,
a un contexto en el que, bueno, que
and
nos
she'll talk
interesa,
about
¿no?
a
Que es el caso de
context
Colombia, en el que, bueno, que
that's totally
aunque
different.
todavía de manera
In the
incompleta,
case of Colombia,
sí que
although there
ha
is,
pasado por un proceso
although it is
de
still
negociación de paz,
incomplete, and
de acuerdo,
you have gone through a
y
peace
casos
agreement
de
process.
Yemen, casos de Yemen y Siria, y
In
ahí sí que me
Yemen,
gustaría que nos comentaras
the situation is
un
totally different.
poco cuáles son
So Pamela, tell us a bit
¿cuál ha sido un poco la experiencia
what
de
has
las
been
mujeres en ambos
the
países
experience
a
of
la hora
women
de intentar
when it
acceder
comes to
a
trying to
estas formas de
access
participación, ¿no? ¿Cuáles están siendo
participation
pues,
space?
todos estos obstáculos que se
You know,
están,
all of these
que se
obstacles
están enfrentando
that are
y qué espacios también
confronting
también
people
persisten a pesar
and that
de que también, bueno, pues
obstacles that persist
vamos a
in
comentar,
spite of the
pues
fact
que hay experiencias bastante
that there are
importantes en cuanto
significant
a las
experiences
propuestas, ¿no? Desde las
in terms of the
organizaciones.
different proposals
Pamela.
that can be made. Thank you, Maria. Well, the first thing I'd like to do is to explain why I believe these cases are relevant. Each one of them has its own peculiarities, but I think they share some points in common, and that should be taken into account. And it's related to the protests of people in the region. They come from very intense armed conflicts that have created many mortal victims. And these are also conflicts characterized by large groups of civil population. In the case of Syria, we have to remember that we have the worst displacement crisis, forced displacement crisis worldwide. Whereas in Yemen, the scaling of violence has brought that country, which was already the poorest country in the Arab world, to the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. 80% of its population needs some sort of assistance. So 80%, let me highlight that, of its population needs some sort of a humanitarian aid. So these are two contexts in which there are very serious consequences from a gender perspective and with a specific and disproportionate impact on women and girls. And these are different concepts. I mean, there isn't only a single armed actor. There is one, two, or three armed actors, and in which we also notice the involvement of regional and international actors that have projected their interests in the armed conflict, and this makes the resolution even more difficult. And another point in common is that both Syria and Yemen have started formal negotiation processes with an international approach promoted mainly by the United Nations. Have how have these processes been? How has a gender perspective been included? Have they complied with the main principles and agreements of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda? We need to remember here that one of the key points of the agenda is the recognition of the need that women participate equally and fully in all of the initiatives for the promotion of peace and in all of the efforts linked to the transformation of conflict, including peace processes. The data bring a totally different reality. Between 1992 and 2009, women accounted for an average of only 13% of the negotiating people, 6% of mediators, and only 6% of signature of people signing these processes for the world. The analysis of the experience in Syria and Yemen unfortunately confirmed this trend observed at a global level. The progress is quite shy, irregular, and not consistent in general terms. There is still the exclusion of women in the peace negotiations. The spaces in which women have participated are basically consultative, without any guarantees of incidence in the real high-level decision spaces. And so, in the existence of the agenda has been significant in terms of focus, but there have been gender structures that Syrian and Yemeni women have actually denounced as insufficient, symbolic, as a mere appearance of inclusiveness. And, well, patriarchy and militarism keep on imposing structural obstacles to the participation of women in peace processes. Let me try and talk a bit about the experiences. In the case of Yemen, for example, we have to bear in mind that it's a country that has systematically occupied the last place in international rankings in terms of gender equality. In a context of high levels of discrimination and restriction for the participation of women in the public arena, it is rather significant the role they played in a process of revolutions in 2011. As opposed to other countries in the region, in Yemen, the revolution first developed into an agreed transition between the axis of the National Dialogue Conference, in which different social and political actors were involved, and in which Yemeni women had an unprecedented participation, thanks to their struggle and to the support of the United Nations team involved in the process and other international actors, and their capacity of incident during the preliminary phase of the design. Um, well, they defined a quota of 30% of women in all of the delegations that participate in the conference, in addition to a specific delegation composed only by women. And they decided that the presence of women at the highest level of the working teams would have to have a quorum for the decisions that um, in practice were undertaken. And there are other elements and other mechanisms that reinforced the presence of women. In spite of it all, they never reached that quota. There were some Yemeni groups that decided that they would rather have an empty chair than giving it to a woman. And this, the rejection that actually, that rejection that was provoked by this quota is rather significant. In spite of it all, women actually had a significant role played with some issues. And they decided that there should be a participation of a minimum of 30% of women in public institutions. And these are other changes which had to consecrate a new constitution that were never approved because the process of transition actually just stopped at the end of 2014. During the second phase since 2015, with the scaling of violence in the country, especially starting in 2015, there was a new phase that has started, and Yemeni women have not had a significant participation in formal spaces in which in which the armed conflict in which they have tried to approach the armed conflict issue. As an example, at the end of 2018, they signed an agreement in Stockholm between the two armed parties. There was just one single woman in the delegation and no reference to gender in the agreement. The office of the special UN representative had favored the creation of a technical institution composed by women, but just with a consultative character. And as far as we know, the justifications to exclude Yemeni women point out that it was not the right time, that they didn't have the skills required. As has happened in other contexts, they believe that women issues are irrelevant or inadequate for negotiations. In the case of Syria, we can also see a good illustration of the difficulties that women have to access high-level negotiation spaces. Although the first conference promoted by the United Nations to approach the conflict in Geneva in 2012 was approved, a document was approved that refers explicitly to the need that Syrian women participate fully in the deliberations about the future of the country. Its road has been filled with obstacles. In fact, the United Nations started a number of conversations about Syria in 2014, but it was not until 2016 that after insistent pressures that women actually attained a more formal presence in the process. That year, the Advisory Women's Council was established, composed by 12 women with different political sensibilities, and they have kept a direct communication with a special representatives of the United Nations for Syria, as is the case in Yemen, also with a consulting format and parallel to the negotiations. In different rounds, the participation of women in the delegations has not gone over 15%, and it has just just in the law, it has been one of the last structures that have been set up, a committee to discuss a new constitution in Syria. It is in that context that women have actually attained representation that is of about 30%. I haven't got a lot of time to actually talk about these considerations, but let me say, first of all, in spite of the persistent marginalization and the enormous role they play in activities for peace building, Syrian and Yemeni women organizations have promoted initiatives that actually cover a very wide range of themes. Mediations to actually ceasefire locally, actions to avoid the recruiting of minors and demilitarizing schools, investigations about abuse and violation of human rights perpetrated by different armed actors, campaigns, pressure campaigns to attain the liberation of prisoners, networks to assist in the promotion of basic services and humanitarian aid, information projects with a gender perspective, and education for peace. After a number of consultations, Syrian women have designed their own roadmap, their feminist roadmap, to guarantee a safe return of refugees and displaced people. And they have made specific proposals about how the reconstruction of the country should recognize the needs and capacities and skills of men and women, or how a new constitution should have a feminist gaze or a feminist outlook, just to mention a few. Also, women organizations from Syria, Yemen, and other countries in the region have been amongst the first to insist on the urgency of a ceasefire in order to face the COVID situation, thus uniting themselves to a special and global calling of the Secretary General of the United Nations. They do not lack experience, and therefore the knowledge is firsthand about the impact of war, and the initiatives of peace are crucial for the peaceful transformation of the conflicts, but it is all ignored. Secondly, I need to underline the persisting obstacles in spite of the evidence about the positive impact of participation of women in the negotiations and peace processes. In the last few years, research has concluded that the participation of women and the participation of civil society has some very major positive impacts on the sustainability and the durability of these agreements. It increases the possibility that peace agreements are reached and the possibility that these peace agreements are implemented, and it facilitates overcoming moments in which people come to a dead end. These results contradict the false arguments that justify the exclusion of civil society and women because supposedly they do not make negotiations efficient. With regards to this point, I'd like to insist on the fact that inclusion does not mean just to add women to the negotiating table. We need to bear in mind the multiple experiences that women bring forth and to transcend the essentialist perspectives that recognize women only as victims or as pacifiers. It also implies placing on the discussion the rights of women so that they are exposed, presented, and to question the gender-based discrimination from an intersectional uh, gaze or outlook, so that the relationship between other categories, religion, social class, ethnic group, or age, are also taken into account, and the impact and the voice of people with gender identities that are not heterosexual. Peace processes must be spaces where, as it was said last week, in which it is possible to change structures, question security, and bet on a transforming justice that will have positive impacts not only for women but for society at large. Spaces in which problems are understood and where peace is not turned into a problem from a feminist perspective. In this context, the third and last idea I'd like to highlight is persistent exclusion in spite of the fact that Syrian women and Yemeni women, and also women from other regions of the Middle East and Northern Africa, have claimed actively their right to participate for a for fairness sake, because it's their right, it's an issue based on justice. They have right as political subjects. They have denounced in different fora the attempts to marginalize them and to prioritize armed actors on the negotiating table. Thus, promoting the militarizing dynamics. They have rejected that they need to credit their competencies, qualifications, or skills, and that's not demanded of men. And they have not been resigned to be silent. Let me just mention a case in point. Yemeni activist Rasha Yarhoum said so in a very graphic way. She said, "We do not need to be invited. They have organized a network of more than 250 women, both within and outside the country. And when there are consultations, they send a group to expose their demands and priorities. And they have asked the United Nations to demand a quota of 50% of women's chairs in the negotiations about Yemen. And if the parties do not want to comply with the uh, quota, with the quotas, these chairs will be left empty, thus visibilizing the absence of inclusiveness." And if let me paraphrase Madeleine Rees, who says, "We cannot keep on having the same conversation about the participation of women in peace processes for some additional 20 years. Because by then, we hope that a substantive inclusion with full equality of women will not be an object of discussion, but it will be the normal and standard way of proceeding." This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you for listening to me. It's a very complex issue and I had very little time. Well, thank you, Pamela. It has been so interesting listening to you. And you have been given us such a wealth of information. And I'd like to point out to what you have just said. It is our right, and there is still a lot of work to do and a long way to go. These spaces have, women have been left out of these negotiating and peace building spaces. So it's very important not to leave it as something that's not important. We need to actually gain this participation as a full right, as you have mentioned. And it's important to be able to talk about other spaces. And the women who access these spaces in structured ways, they should actually be fully functioning. They should be able to work. Different participations. And your questioning is very, very interesting. We will talk about it further during the Q&A, but I'd like to give the floor now to Zoraida. Zoraida represents a particularly special case. I've been there. And you see the injustice in the Palestinian context. Context in which it looks like internationally many nations in the world take it as something normal, as if nothing was happening. But it is an ongoing conflict. And Zoraida will talk to us about it. In this occupied, occupied territory situation, what does peace mean to you, Palestinian women, considering you're occupied? And how you organizing yourselves as Palestinian women, not only with regards to the agenda about women, peace, women and peace. Thank you, Maria. Thank you all for giving me a chance to talk about an issue that's not only difficult, it's difficult and it's a problem to talk about peace. Peace is, the definition of peace is contextualized. And when I read studies and when I read literature from the United Nations, It's as if we only had one peace. But no, what does peace mean? And we need to contextualize it. The concept, the reality of people imply questioning what peace means. Because for a refugee woman in a land that's occupied by the Israeli military, you know, what is peace? For a woman, for a mother who can't see her sons or daughters, what does peace mean? 4.5 years ago, we made an in-depth study in which we wanted to understand what does peace mean. Because peace cannot be measured with the same rule. It is an international rule, as if it were a one-size-fits-all concept. Because, I mean, in a context in which there is no war, that doesn't mean there is peace. Because if you live in a land where there is poverty, and where there is a significant crisis and in which my children can be killed anytime, that's no peace. So we need to contextualize the concept of peace. And we, Palestinian women, we have a history in which we have been occupied for more than 70 years. Peace is at the very center of our struggle. It is a struggle that we take up to reach peace. But we always talk about a fair peace. Because between the PLO and the State of Israel, I mean, in the 90s, we were in Madrid, the Madrid process, the PLO and the State of Israel. And then we talk about Oslo, but peace with justice, because without justice, there can be no peace. That's one point. Another point is that we try to explain people that it's not a conflict between Israel and Palestine. It is not a conflict between Palestine and Israel. It's not a conflict between Arab people. It is a conflict due to a military occupation. It is the outcome of a military violent occupation of our land. We are not the indigenous people. We are the indigenous owners of the land. This violent occupation wants to take everything away from us. It is a colonizing occupation, because colonization is important. It's the outcome of this occupation. So it is a colonizing occupation, and they are taking away the land from its lawful owners. Because, and what these indigenous people are doing, i.e. we Palestinians, were just defending our rights to our land. And that's clear, the right to our land. And some people say, no. The point is not to struggle for the land. The point is to struggle for the dignity of our identity. We are human beings just like everybody else. Well, humanism and land ownership come together. When we talk about 1325 and peace, there's a problem that we Palestinians have. Because 87 decisions, Maria, of the General Council, or the Security Council, not the General Assembly, but the Security Council of the United Nations, they have made 87 decisions to be able to end with this military situation in Palestine. I mean, it is the daily killing of people they're trying to stop. And none of these 87 resolutions have been applied, has been implemented. Now, 87 decisions of the Security Council of the United Nations, and none of them have been implemented. And we read them, and when we read that, we Palestinian women and men, we say, okay, fine. It is a mechanism just like any other one. It's a mechanism to start a dialogue, it's a discourse, it's a speech. And at least we have something in common, a common language we all understand. But the truth is that when we talk about 1325, we don't talk about women and occupation. The same rule, the same gaze, same outlook. Wherever we are, whether we are in Colombia, whether we are in Yemen, whether we are in Ethiopia, Syria, or Palestine. Well, that's not acceptable. We should apply these decisions and to talk about peace. For the Palestinian people, we Palestinians need peace inside, not outside. 89% of the Palestinian people are refugees. We live in Lebanon, Jordan, and other neighboring countries. 48, there are refugees within our own land, and we try to work all together. And for us, peace is crucial. Peace with the right of return to your land. Peace with the right to rescue and recover my identity. It's a peace so that this genocide that's being carried out stops. It's a peace in which international community should face its own responsibility, because the international community is just washing its hands. For Palestinian women, we have a double or threefold scope, because we live in an environment that's fully military. It's militaristic. And that reinforces certain mindsets. When you live in a violent context, you give peace to the patriarchy because you're threatening it. And when you threaten it, that patriarchal society wants to defend itself. And it adheres even more strongly to its own ideas. So peace is even more difficult. We're struggling to change a patriarchal society. We are struggling as Palestinian women, but also as nationalists with the rest, in order to have a free land in which we can live our lives fully and freely. Since 1932, Palestinian women have been active in that struggle. Since 1932, Palestinian women, hundreds of Palestinian women have been proactively struggling for that. There are many studies carried out that show that since 1932 till now, these women are the ones who have been raising their fists to fight. So when we talk about participation, when we talk about at least 30% of participation of women, well, it hasn't been easy. But we keep on working very hard. They say, oh, they raise their voices. They scream and yell. We say, yes, we do. But we will not stop doing that till things are truly changed. We want to raise our voices and we want to knock on each door until changes are truly implemented. There are working people's movements, then you have also political parties, and then you have student movements and the working people's movement. Political parties and student movements, what are they doing? The only ones that still raise their voices and that are still struggling are women. So you say, my goodness, you're giving me a headache with your screams and yells. Well, that's what we have to do. We will not take a step backwards ever. Since 1932, we have been going ahead, always ahead. And it's quite dangerous, the fact that the slow genocide of the occupation in Palestinian population is leaving us women alone. But when we talk about women in front of a violent military attack from Israel, it all ends up in a bloodshed. bloodshed. And then I think, well, women will get into holes they will not be able to get out of because we are all running into the same problem. So, in the same place, we talk about other issues because they are killing us. They are uprooting us. So, this is a dilemma we're learning to overcome. We're learning how to occupy different niches. The rights of women are a crucial point for our country's political independence. We will only be free the day we women are free. We cannot have political mental prisons. We need free people. And women are the ones who build up nations. And they are the ones making the freedom of people. And we want to be free in a free land. And 1325, when we look at it, we look at it with full respect. The only thing that interests me about 1325 is its efficiency. Because when we sit around the same table and we talk, fine. But you cannot actually sit on an equal footing. People who kill us cannot be taken there. So to that criminals through pay for its crimes. The executioner should pay for his crime. I mean, we're not struggling for a piece of land. Somebody is planning how to uproot us from our land and how to execute us. It is a colonizing military occupation system to erase us from our land and occupy our land. So criminals have to pay for their crime. And that's when a fair peace will start. That's when a fair peace foundation will be established. Political participation. Of course, we have been doing it since 1932. We Palestinian women have been politically very active since 1932. So, how do we make sure that criminals pay for their crimes? And the landowner should keep its rights. That would be the real foundation for a true peace and a sustainable peace. Thank you. Well, thank you, Zoraida. My goodness, how intense a presentation you have made. Very interesting, all of the things you have said. What you have talked about, a fair peace and the different views on the definition of peace. We should analyze this in greater depth indeed. It is the demand of many, many countries and of many women throughout the world when they claim the right to access not only peace but also justice. The fact is that the action of women on peace and justice is crucial. Without the truth, without knowing what has truly happened, it is impossible to reach a fair and sustainable and durable peace and long-lasting peace. And it's going to be very difficult to sit around the same table to negotiate if the executioner is sitting on an equal footing on the same table. So now, well, Pamela has talked about the different experiences peace building and also what Clemencia has said, and what Zoraida has said. Well, I believe that 1325, Zoraida has said that it is not efficient, it's a very small tool. But in Colombia, it is an instrument that's actually actively used. Or for your proposals, or has it not been useful, Clemencia? What do you think? Has 1325 been useful or not? Clemencia, do you have anything to mention? Clemencia, your mic is off. We can't hear you. Clemencia, can you hear us?
Hola.
Hello, hello, hello again.
Hola. Ok.
Let's
¿Me
see.
escuchan bien?
Can you hear me well?
No escuché la pregunta, perdón.
I couldn't hear the question. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry. Okay, with regards to what Zoraida has said about 1325, she has talked about the whole issue about justice, repair, and she says that, well, we need to have the truth and we need to have criminals pay for their crimes before we can have a sustainable and long-lasting peace. And she says that 1325 is very small. It's a very small tool for Palestinian people. I'd like to know your opinion about that in your Colombian context. I mean, with the occupation context and all of the demands that we have in Palestine, 1325 is indeed a very small tool. But in the case of Colombia, that has not been the case, has it? It has actually been used as a beacon for the demands issued by different women's organizations, hasn't it?
Bueno, yo creo que ha sido a los dos niveles.
Well, both
El
things,
avance
yes.
en el marco de la 1325
Progress
ha sido tanto a
within the
nivel
framework
local, de las
of
organizaciones
1325 has been at a local level,
estamos
the
en
organization
las
of women
regiones.
working on the
Creo que ha
field and in
habido
the
un
regions. There
empoderamiento
has been a real
no solo
significant
hacia
empowerment,
conocer lo que
not
significa
only with
las
regards to knowing
posibilidades
what
latinoamericanas
the
a pesar
communities
de la resolución,
want and need
sino que también
through the
hemos
lens of the
trabajado
resolution and the
en
window the
función
resolution
de
opens up,
incidir
but we have
para
also
que
been
se
able to
implemente
work
esa resolución en diferentes
to
escenarios,
implement this resolution
pero también
1325
en
in
lo
our context.
nacional, en lo regional y en lo nacional,
But it has
hay
also had a significant
esfuerzos
effect
y
regionally
apuestas
and
a
nationally.
partir de esta herramienta para
Based
garantizar
on that
la participación de las
tool
mujeres, para garantizar mejores
to
condiciones de
guarantee
salud,
the
para
participation of
ejercer
women, to
nuestra
guarantee
labor
better
como mujeres
conditions,
defensoras
and to
de
guarantee
derechos
our
humanos y
work
constructoras de
as
paz,
women who
para generar
defend human
espacios
rights and
de
as peace builders,
articulación, de diálogo
so
y
that
sobre todo
there is a real
para
dialogue,
buscar
and
avanzar
especially
en
to make
acciones de
headway
reconciliación
in
y de
terms of
reconciliación. Esto ha
reconciliation
sido clave,
actions.
como digo, pues a distintos
This
niveles y
has
las
been
mujeres allí han jugado
crucial.
un papel importante.
1325 has been crucial for
Hay un
women, for
activismo
Colombian
muy
women
fuerte
to play a
de las
significant role.
mujeres por la incidencia en la
Women
implementación de los acuerdos de paz,
actually
pero también
have played a
fuertes
very
en
significant role
declaraciones
in
de
the implementation
reconciliación,
of the peace
de
agreements,
reconocimiento y de
and
respeto
also
por el
in
otro y
terms
por la
of
otra. Y
recognition
yo
and
creo que esto es
respect
importante
towards
para abordar ese
others.
camino
And
de
this is
paz y de
crucial
igualdad,
in order to
para abordar
travel
ese camino
this
donde
road
nos
towards
reconozcamos
peace
a partir de
so
ese
that we
reconocimiento, ese
recognize
reconocimiento
ourselves, and
a
based on
nivel
that
regional
recognition,
a veces, pues se tenga en cuenta también esa biodiversidad y
so that
esa
the biodiversity is also taken
singularidad
into
que
account,
representa
and the
Colombia y las
specificity and the
regiones
peculiarities of
y
Colombia
particularmente el Cauca, la
within
región
the
donde yo
international
soy,
community of nations,
es una
especially our
región
region, Cauca,
habitada fundamentalmente por
which is
comunidades
a region
étnicas,
inhabited basically
afrodescendientes,
by
pero
ethnic
también están
communities,
las comunidades
Afro-Colombian
indígenas. Entonces hay
communities,
una
and indigenous communities.
plurietnicidad allí
So we
que
have
hay que aprovechar
Native
para
Indians,
no sentir
Black
aislados, ¿no? Es
Colombians,
decir,
and mixed white Colombians
recoger
living in
o
that region.
valorar todos esos
So we
aportes
want
que podemos
to
hacer desde
value,
diferentes
you know,
ópticas y
all of the
perspectivas y
work that we
posibilidades
Black
y
Colombian
poner la
and
reflexión
indigenous
en la
Colombian women
construcción
can
de
do
la paz en este país.
together for
Creo que la
the
resolución
consolidation of peace in
1325
our country.
pues, es una de
Resolution 1325 has been a significant tool for us, and it has given us a wonderful opportunity for to attain peace in our war context, especially for making peace a possible. Thank you, Clemencia. Pamela, with regards to what you have said about Yemen and Syria, do you believe that Resolution 1325 has played a role at a local level? Has it been a tool to articulate the action carried out by women in the region? Well, I'd like to link up with some of the thoughts expressed by Zoraida. I mean, we have to bear in mind the local context. And depending on the context, the agenda is perceived in different ways. Some people see it as an agenda to promote peace and security, but it cannot be applied to a context like Palestine. But it doesn't, for example, it's not efficient to bring the case of Syria to the International Court of Justice. I mean, some countries who are permanent members of the Security Council, they keep on actually trading weapons, and that keeps on feeding the cycle of violence. In the Middle East, there are some voices who ask themselves, how has it been implemented? How has the Resolution 1325 been implemented as a tool to solve conflicts? I mean, it is a tool implemented at very different levels. There is a feeling, as Zoraida has said, that the resolution and the agenda have produced a common language. We all speak the same language now, but we need to channel our participation claims, and that has also favored the intertwining between different communities and different organizations that work on the field, in the field of peace and security. And there have also been exchanges of experiences between different countries, not only at a local level, but also at an international level. I remember a project, a very interesting project, for example, at WILF, that has united women from Bosnia and elsewhere to work on the issue of sexual violence and to separate a moment of transitional justice that covers this in order to avoid the mistakes that have been carried out in the case of Bosnia. So that's a very interesting issue to tackle. But we should also be aware that local institutions keep on working on peace issues and on justice issues, as Zoraida has said, much before the articulation of Resolution 1325. There are some critical voices that have been raised that feel that sometimes they have tried to tame the local agenda. But that is also clearly related to how we work in different projects. The fact that sometimes donors define certain action lines and they emphasize certain points in the agenda with a narrow view of implementation. The result, women's organizations, sometimes they have to twist the work and they have to comply with some of the requirements of the donors, so that in the case, for example, in the case of the organizations that work in Northern Africa and the Middle East, for example, they are forced to work on violent extremism, in spite of the fact that this is not an issue that they were dealing with. They were dealing much more with issues related to the rights and the end of discrimination, but within the context of the conditions imposed by the donors, they have had to adapt their local agendas. So that sure has to be done, but always keeping in mind the priorities of the local agendas. At WILF, for example, the case of Indian women who have set forth some very interesting issues, i.e. to fund projects in which the institutions themselves, the associations themselves define their own needs. And this gives them greater flexibility. And it allows them to cover the needs they have. And finally, in the case of Yemen, Yemen does not have a national action plan. Syria, sorry, does not have a national action plan. Yemen, yes, it has just approved it, promoted by the international government, which only controls part of the country. And it was approved with a very limited participation of civil society. And there are many critical voices that question how it has been done. But at least it encompasses large commitments at a national wide level. And that's yet another tool, as Zoraida has mentioned, for accountancy. I mean, as a tool that may allow them in the future to demand some accountability with regards to the commitment and the compliance with the commitments. Well, Zoraida, there are many, many questions being asked in the chat. And in order to give continuity to this discussion, some questions asked on the chat, and this is something you have mentioned, Zoraida, there is some resistance by women in Colombia and elsewhere with regards to have women in Colombia or Palestine seen any hesitations or doubts by their own colleagues to be integrated in the process of political participation and to unite the voices of Palestinian women to other voices? Could it be useful for their effect in the peace-building process? And I'd like to know if there has been a lot of resistance by the armed forces in these countries, for example, when it comes to getting training. So could you respond briefly to these questions, please? Zoraida's mic is off. Zoraida, your mic is off. Sorry about that. With regards to the resistances that we meet, well, we do not meet any resistance. Women participate in different movements, in working class, working or labor movements, student movements, etc. But unfortunately, there is a glass ceiling. There's always the glass ceiling that does not allow us to go beyond a certain point, especially when it comes to decision making. In local councils and at the parliament, there was a big national campaign carried out in which it was promoted that now we can participate. And although it is not written anywhere, this is part of the environment. For example, if we ask for a change and we say that we have the right, the same rights as men, then that's a problem. Because if we participate in political parties, we are used by society to serve in the struggle, to serve in the common goals that we all have, and we are accepted. But if we talk about women's rights, or if we talk about being able to control our own bodies, or when we defend the individual rights of women, then we encounter a lot of resistance. We actually encounter a big wall. It is a continuous struggle. How can we put both struggle together, the struggle for our common goals and the struggle for women's rights. And we feminists, we can have also a nationalistic vision for everybody's good. Amongst ourselves, within the women's movement, there are different voices. Some voices say that we have to be mainstream and follow the general line. And others say, and they say that, well, these women's issues should be left for later. And others say that, no, we should actually talk about both things, our national struggles and our women's struggles at the same time. Thank you, Zoraida. This is crucial. And it also links up nicely with what our colleagues have said, with what you have said beforehand. It looks like the spaces for women are sideways spaces or parallel spaces. But I think we should start and see how we articulate these spaces to mainstream them. And women's claims are crucial claims, like, the freedom you mentioned. We are human beings. And we need to articulate that because either we are in or we are not in. And we should be in all discussion spaces. And this is what Pamela has said about such complex situations like the ones in Syria and Yemen. There are reticences, there are hesitations, and there are shared rejections. But we have to see how to go about it from a practical point of view. Clemencia, I wanted to ask you something based on what you have said. Okay, you have talked about the political participation of women. Some people ask me about racism. How does discrimination influence the participation of Black Colombian women in the political life of Colombia? And what's the role of a patriarchal society? How does patriarchy affect the capacity of women to act? You have the floor, Clemencia. Well, indeed, the women's social movement in Colombia also has different voices. Some women, well, this is the outcome of our history, of course. Some believe that women are not ready to occupy political power spaces. Although, fortunately, this sort of an attitude is becoming weakened thanks to the work we're carrying out, and also thanks to the work and the results and outcomes that women have achieved and generated. This has allowed us to build confidence on our actions. But above all, it has allowed us to demonstrate that we need to make headway towards actions based on equity. And here, women should not only be caregivers, but they should also be present in decision-making processes that affect us all. And we have every right to materialize our dreams. And we need to have legislation and a peace that guarantees our right to life and, above all, our human rights. With regards to our participation in political institutions, well, unfortunately, that's where there is great racism and discrimination. And we see that in the aggressions against Black Colombian women or indigenous women that hold power. Because immediately they are accused of being thieves. And that's due to the discrimination that we have in Colombia, but also the legal system. We see that in the legal system, in employment, in the education system, in all fields. It is all related to how society is marred with discrimination at all levels. And it is discrimination that has made indigenous communities and Black Colombian communities to feel that we're treated as inferiors. And that's why the state does not invest in our communities. And institutions act in a totally inarticulate way in our case. And that has not allowed us to make any progress, especially in our territories, in our region. It has not allowed us to overcome in a harmonious way the inequality gap. They just assume that that's how we like to live. And that's just the outcome of another stigmatization we suffer from. And of course, that generates a number of limitations in order not only to access services, but also to guarantee our rights. Thank you very much indeed, Clemencia. Well, time is up. There are so many things we have not been able to discuss. For example, prevention as a component. The other day it was mentioned, well, last Friday, and that has been the object of subsequent resolutions. Well, before I close the meeting, I'd like to ask you, for example, Pamela, do you want to say any closing words? Anything you would like to add? I know there are many, many things that have not been discussed. There are many, many things that have been discussed. But as Clemencia has said, with regards to the obstacles and the hurdles against participation, in the case of the rights in the Middle East, Northern Africa region, there is a component of mistrust. They believe that the participation of women is like a Western position. They accuse them of having foreign agendas. You know, who are the women participating in these processes? There is an overrepresentation of women who come from urban spaces compared to women coming from rural contexts, women who are more vulnerable, who have a refugee status. So this is also resulting from the vision of women as victims by the actors involved, the actors who negotiate. And the field of mediation is still very, very much men-oriented. It's very much men-dominated. There are many synergies between politicians and diplomats. There isn't the right gender training amongst politicians and diplomats that commit them to the implementation of the Resolution 1325. And as a result, well, the progress of these politics, not at a country level or at the United Nations level, but at the level of civil servants, is not possible. And this cannot continue. It has happened in contests like the one we just mentioned. For example, in Stockholm, there wasn't a single woman participating in the context of the Yemen peace treaty, in spite of all of the feminist claims. So a long way is yet to be traveled before we implement the agenda and we comply with the commitments mentioned in the agenda. Zoraida, would you like to express a final sentence before I officially close the meeting? Sorry. Yes. Since Resolution 1325 came to light, the cause of women talking about peace and analyzing peace, and analyzing the context of peace, each one from her own context has grown. And that's very, very positive. But then, when we talked about peace, each one had her own vision about what peace is all about. Now, thanks to Resolution 1325, we all share a common language. And thanks to 1325, we know what we're talking about when we use certain words. And this discussion amongst women about peace at a regional level and at international level is becoming increasingly normalized. And of course, that fosters communication and dialogue. Because of course, out of those conversations, some very positive things always come out. Thank you very much indeed. I fully agree with the three of you. As I've already said, 1.5 hours is really not enough time, unfortunately. We still face many, many challenges, but we have come a long way. And based, on our local contexts, we have to make sure that the agenda is not just accumulating dust in a drawer. At a local level, women on the field, what Soraya has said, peace is not a single one-size-fits-all concept. It depends on your context. And when you ask a different group of women, what does peace mean to you? Each one of them gives a different answer. Some peace is to be at peace at home without having domestic violence or without having somebody throwing a bomb at your house. But it is crucial that we understand each other. We all live in different realities, but we should all use Resolution 1325 as a common language in order to create networks, in order to take action jointly, and in order to know that, unfortunately, we have not achieved our goals. We are far from them. And as Pamela has already said, we need to occupy these decision-making spaces increasingly. And now we are going to give some space for our colleagues from Colombia to end the meeting with a song. Because through music, a message is always best conveyed. And I invite you to attend our third and last webinar in this cycle on Friday, the 20th of November, in which we will deal with the notion of security, tensions, and opportunities. It's going to be a very, very interesting webinar indeed. So you are all kindly invited, and we will actually send you the invitations through the web pages of the organizing groups. And without any further ado, Clemencia, please share with us with your country's wonderful music to end this meeting beautifully. Thank you. Well, it has been so important for us to share with all of us, our dear colleagues, Pamela, Zoraida, Maria, and with all of the people who have made possible to have this space for sharing. It is so important we keep on building up roads for peace. So I invite you to always think that each one of us is as strong as we are all together. So a chain is always as strong as its weakest link. Clemencia, unfortunately, we can't hear you. The sound is off. So I'm going to end with a song that we have prepared especially for you and that we want to share with you. So now you will listen to the musical piece prepared by our colleagues for all of you. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoy it. Good afternoon. We will now sing a song for you. It is entitled Learning to be Resistant. And it talks about our experience. Because we express our first-hand experiences and what we live through music. And through that, we build up our future through the Association of Colombian Black Women. So this song is dedicated to you. Can you hear us?
Las mujeres de la provenientes de Buenos Aires, nuestra comunidad, fuimos despertadas forzadamente desde los 36 hasta el día de hoy. Desde los 36 hasta el día de hoy. Nos insultaban, nos humillaban y con el acuerdo sexual con nuestro color de piel y con el acuerdo sexual con nuestro color de piel. Haciendo resistencia hemos podido vivir avanzando en los procesos de nuestra región. Haciendo resistencia hemos podido vivir avanzando en los procesos de nuestra región. Mujeres de Azón, caminemos con tesón, sanando las heridas que la guerra nos dejó. Mujeres de Azón, caminemos con tesón, sanando las heridas que la guerra nos dejó. La gente no ha olvidado todo lo que pasó, algunos lo recuerdan con mucho honor. La gente no ha olvidado todo lo que pasó, algunos lo recuerdan con mucho honor. Se perdieron las cosechas, se murieron los animales, la mujer aguantando hambre por esta situación. Se perdieron las cosechas, se murieron los animales, la mujer aguantando hambre por esta situación. Ay, Dios mío, qué dolor al ver la desolación, cuando las mujeres de campo partieron para la ciudad a trabajar en casa de familia para sus hijos levantar, en casa de familia para sus hijos levantar. Haciendo resistencia hemos podido vivir avanzando en los procesos de nuestra región. Haciendo resistencia hemos podido vivir avanzando en los procesos de nuestra región. Mujeres de Azón, caminemos con tesón, sanando las heridas que la guerra nos dejó. Mujeres de Azón, caminemos con tesón, sanando las heridas que la guerra nos dejó. Sanando las heridas que la guerra nos dejó. Que viva la paz, que viva el amor, viva la alegría de nuestras negras, mi Señor. Que viva la paz, que viva el amor, viva la alegría de nuestras negras, mi Señor. Que viva la paz, que viva el amor.
Excellent.
Increíble, compañeras. Gracias.
Incredible, my friends. Thank you for sharing with all of us that beautiful song. It's incredible. I wish I could be there sharing with you and hugging you. Let's keep in touch. And we hope to keep on having these spaces to share. Thank you very much.